The scorching afternoon sun baked the unforgiving asphalt of downtown Philadelphia, turning the busy intersection into a suffocating oven of noise and exhaust fumes. In the middle of this chaotic urban jungle, a tragedy was unfolding in plain sight, yet it remained entirely invisible to the rushing world. Lying collapsed against a cold, soot-covered brick wall was Hope, a golden retriever who had once known the warmth of a home, but now knew only pain. Her golden coat, which should have been an eye, radiant halo, was matted with grime, motor oil, and the dust of a city that had forgotten her. Panting heavily, her ribcage heaved with every shallow breath, a silent testament to days of starvation and the crushing weight of a broken heart. Her situation was beyond critical. It was a slow, agonizing march toward death amidst a crowd of thousands. Her right hind leg was twisted at a sickening, unnatural angle, swollen to twice its normal size, a cruel souvenir from a car that hadn't bothered to stop. The pain was a blinding, white-hot fire that pulsed with every beat of her tired heart, but she didn't make a sound. She knew that whimpering had only brought kicks and angry shouts in the past. Instead, Hope lay perfectly still, her brown eyes glazed over with a profound sadness, watching the forest of legs passing by. She was waiting for the end, resigned to the fact that she would expire right there, just inches away from the shoes of people too busy to care. Hundreds of people walked past her every single hour, clutching their expensive iced coffees and staring blankly into their smartphones, completely oblivious to the suffering soul at their feet. This was the true villain of her story. Not a monster with claws, but the chilling, abstract monster of human indifference. To them, she was just a pile of dirty rags or a piece of trash to be stepped over. Every pair of eyes that glanced her way and immediately looked away was a fresh wound to her spirit. Hope watched them with a fading glimmer of faith, her instincts screaming that surely one of these tall figures would stop. But the cruelty of the city was relentless, and with every person who ignored her, the light in her eyes dimmed a little more. Deep inside her battered body, a final desperate prayer was forming, a silent plea to the universe for just one act of mercy before the darkness took her. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival. She was harboring a terrified secret that kept her grounded to this spot of concrete. Hope felt her strength evaporating like water on the hot pavement, her vision blurring at the edges as dehydration set in. She tried to lift her heavy head to make eye contact with a woman in a business suit, but the woman simply sidestepped her with a look of disgust. It was the ultimate betrayal. Hope let her chin drop back onto her paws, a singular tear cutting a clean track through the dirt on her face. She was ready to let go. Then, the rhythm of the footsteps changed. Amidst the frantic clicking of heels and the shuffle of sneakers, a pair of heavy, dust-covered work boots slowed down and came to a deliberate halt. Thomas, a 52-year-old construction worker with calloused hands and a soul as sturdy as the buildings he erected, stopped in his tracks. He was exhausted, his reflective vest stained with the grey dust of a 12-hour shift, his body aching for rest. But unlike the thousands before him, Thomas saw her. He didn't see a dirty stray, he saw a shattered angel. He knelt on the grimy sidewalk, ignoring the stares of passers-by, and extended a rough, trembling hand toward her muzzle. For the first time in weeks, Hope felt a touch that wasn't meant to hurt her, and it sent a shockwave of emotion through her frazzled nervous system. She flinched initially, expecting a blow, but Thomas whispered a soft, guttural, "Hey there, girl," his voice thick with sudden emotion. It was the sound of salvation, summoning every ounce of energy left in her. Reserves. Hope didn't bite. Instead, she leaned into his calloused palm, letting out a long, shuddering sigh that sounded like a weeping child. She extended her dry tongue and gently licked the cement dust from his fingers. It was a sacred contract signed in that moment. "I trust you. Please don't let me die." If you are already in tears seeing this connection, please subscribe to our channel. Your prayers can create miracles for angels like Hope. Let's see if Thomas can save her in time. Thomas felt his heart shatter into a million pieces as he looked closer at the devastation wrought upon this innocent creature. He noticed the severity of her leg, the way her ribs poked through her skin like the hull of a wrecked ship. But then he noticed something even more alarming. Hope wasn't just resting. She was guarding something. She let out a low, urgent whine and nudged Thomas's hand with her wet nose, directing his attention not to her injury, but toward a dark, narrow gap beneath a rusted, metal staircase right behind her. Her eyes shifted frantically between Thomas and the dark void, her message clear and terrifying. Help them first. Peering into the darkness of the crawl space, Thomas's eyes adjusted to the gloom, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Trapped behind a heavy industrial iron grate were two tiny, trembling balls of fur, her puppies. They were huddled together on a pile of old, damp newspapers, silent from hunger and fear. Hope had dragged herself here with a broken leg to protect them, using her own body as a shield against the wind and the world. She had starved herself so she wouldn't have to leave them for a second. The realization hit Thomas like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a family hostage situation, and time had already run out. The situation was far worse than he initially thought, presenting a catastrophic obstacle that threatened to end the rescue before it began. The iron grate blocking the puppies had been recently welded shut by city maintenance to prevent rats, inadvertently sealing the puppies inside a metal tomb. Thomas tried to pull at the bars with his bare hands, his muscles straining, veins popping in his neck, but the steel wouldn't budge an inch. The puppies let out weak, high-pitched cries that sliced through the traffic noise, causing Hope to thrash frantically, ignoring the agony in her shattered leg. She looked at Thomas with pure panic, her eyes screaming, you promised to... Help! Panic began to rise in Thomas's chest as he realized he had no tools on him powerful enough to break industrial welds. He stood up, looking around desperately, but the sea of pedestrians just flowed around him like water around a stone, indifferent to the life-and-death struggle happening at their knees. A storm was brewing in the sky, dark clouds rolling in over the skyscrapers, promising a freezing rain that these weakened animals would not survive. The abstract villain of the storm was approaching fast. Hope sensed his hesitation and let out a howl of pure grief, thinking he was about to walk away like everyone else. She dragged herself toward the grate, clawing uselessly at the iron, ready to die trying to reach her babies. Thomas knew he had to make a split-second decision that could cost them everything. He had to leave to get his heavy-duty tools from his truck, which was parked 3 blocks away, but leaving Hope now might break her spirit completely. He grabbed her, face gently between his hands, looking deep into her terrified eyes. I'm coming back, I swear on my life, I am coming back, he told her firmly, though his own voice cracked. He stood up and started running, his heavy boots pounding the pavement, ignoring the fatigue in his legs. As he sprinted away, he prayed to God that the angel on the sidewalk would hold on for just a few more minutes. God bless everyone who would never leave an animal behind. Hit like if you are praying for Thomas to return in time. Thomas sprinted back, his lungs burning like they were filled with hot coals, the heavy hydraulic jack and a crowbar clanging against his side. Every second away from Hope felt like an eternity, and his mind was plagued by images of her giving up before he could return. As he rounded the corner, he saw her, still there, her head resting on her paws, but her eyes were closed, and for a terrifying heartbeat, he thought he was too late. I'm here, sweet girl, I'm here, he shouted, his voice a mix of desperation and hope as he dropped to his knees beside her. Hope's eyes snapped open, and the flicker of recognition in them was like a small candle being lit in a dark room. She had been on the verge of slipping away into the shadows, convinced that the kind man with the gentle hands was just another ghost in her world of suffering. When she saw him panting, sweat dripping from his forehead, she let out a soft, broken whimper that sounded more like a sob of relief. Thomas wasted no time positioning the heavy metal jack against the reinforced iron bars of the crawl space, knowing that every clang of metal was a shock to Hope's shattered nerves. The iron grate was stubborn, a symbol of the cold city that wanted to keep these innocent lives trapped in darkness. Thomas braced his feet against the brick wall and began to pump the handle, the screeching of metal against metal echoing through the street like a scream. People stopped to stare, some even grumbling about the noise and the way he was blocking the sidewalk during the evening rush. One man in a fancy suit actually had the audacity to tell Thomas to move his garbage elsewhere so he could pass. Thomas didn't even look up. His entire world was narrowed down to those bars and the whimpering pups. As the pressure mounted, the metal groaned, but the weld held firm, creating a terrifying, almost failure moment that sent Thomas's heart into his throat. The jack slipped suddenly, crashing against the pavement with a sound like a gunshot, and Hope let out a piercing yelp of pure terror. She tried to scramble away on her 3 good legs, her trauma taking over as she mistook the noise for a fresh attack. Her eyes went wide, showing the whites in a frantic display of fear, and she bared her teeth, not out of aggression, but out of a desperate, primal need to protect herself from more pain. It's okay, baby girl," Thomas whispered, his voice as smooth and comforting as a warm blanket. On a winter night, he knew he had to gain her trust back, or she might bolt into traffic in her panicked state. He sat down on the dirty concrete, ignoring the grime, and slowly reached into his lunchbox. He took out a small piece of his leftover turkey sandwich, the only food he had left after a long day of work. He held it out on his flat palm, keeping his movements slow and predictable, praying that the scent of food would override her paralyzing fear of the humans. Hope's nose twitched, the aroma of the meat cutting through the stench of the city's exhaust. She was so incredibly hungry that her stomach felt like it was eating itself, but her fear was a heavy chain around her neck. She looked at the food, then at Thomas's face, searching for any sign of the cruelty she had known before. Thomas stayed perfectly still, his eyes filled with a softness that no monster could ever fake. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Hope crawled forward on her belly, dragging her broken leg behind her, until she could gently take the offering from his hand. That small bite of food was more than a meal. It was a bridge built over a canyon of mistrust. As Hope chewed, her tail gave a single weak thump against the pavement, a tiny spark of joy in an ocean of misery. Thomas used this moment of peace to reset the jack, this time wedging it more securely against the base of the bars. He knew he had to be fast, as the sky was turning a bruised shade of purple and the first cold drops of rain began to fall. The puppies inside were shivering violently now, their tiny bodies losing heat at an alarming rate. With a final Herculean effort, Thomas threw his entire weight onto the lever of the hydraulic jack. The sound of the weld snapping was the most beautiful music he had ever heard, a sharp crack that signaled the end of their imprisonment. The bars bent upward just enough to create a small opening, but it was still too narrow for Thomas to reach his arm all the way in. He could see the puppies, their eyes still mostly closed, huddled in the very back against the cold dampness. They were too weak to move toward the light, their tiny whimpers fading into silence. "Come on, little ones, just a little further," Thomas urged. But the puppies didn't move. Hope, sensing the danger, pushed her head toward the opening and let out a soft, encouraging bark, her maternal instincts overriding her own physical agony. She was trying to tell her babies that this giant man was a friend, that the nightmare was finally over. It was a heartbreaking sight to see her struggling to help when she could barely even stand herself. Thomas realized he needed to use the crowbar to pry the bottom bar even higher, a move that risked a collapse if he wasn't careful. Just as he was about to make the final push, the flash of blue and red lights reflected off the surrounding buildings. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb and a young officer stepped out, his hand resting cautiously on his belt. "Hey, what are you doing to that property?" the officer shouted over the roar of the city. Thomas didn't stop. He looked the officer dead in the eyes, his face a mask of grimy determination. "There are lives dying in this hole, and I'm not leaving until they're out. You can arrest me after, but right now, I need your help." The officer walked over, ready to be firm, but then he saw Hope, her mangled leg, her pleading eyes, and the 2 tiny lives trapped behind the steel. The toughness in the officer's face melted away, replaced by the same raw empathy that had driven Thomas. He realized that this wasn't a crime. It was a rescue mission fueled by a faith he hadn't seen in a long time. Without a word, the policeman grabbed the other side of the crowbar, and together, the 2 men gave one final bone-straining heave that bent the iron into a wide, inviting arch of freedom. Thomas reached into the dark, cold gap, his fingers brushing against soft, damp fur. He gently scooped up the First puppy, a tiny golden ball that fit perfectly in the palm of his hand. The little creature was ice cold and barely breathing, but as soon as Thomas tucked it inside his warm, reflective vest, it let out a faint, shaky squeak. He reached in again and grabbed the second one, repeating the process. He held them both against his chest, feeling their tiny hearts beating frantically against his own, a rhythm of life that he refused to let stop. Hope watched this with an intensity that was almost human, her eyes tracking every movement Thomas made with her precious babies. When she saw them safe in his arms, the tension that had been holding her together for days finally snapped. She let out a long, wailing cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief that echoed off the skyscraper walls. She knew the fight for her children was won, but the fight for her own life was only just beginning. She collapsed back onto her side, her tongue lolling out, her strength completely spent, now that her mission was accomplished. The physical rescue was complete, and the puppies were no longer trapped in their iron tomb. But the scene was still desperate. The cold rain was now coming down in sheets, soaking through Thomas's clothes and threatening to plunge the weakened animals into hypothermia. Thomas looked at the police officer, who was now using his cruiser to block traffic, creating a safe zone for them. "We need to move her now," Thomas said, his voice urgent. "She's lost too much blood, and her leg is a mess. If we don't get her to a vet in the next 20 minutes, we're going to lose her. Are you rooting for this angel? Your like helps save more lives. Subscribe to support our mission. Now, let's see if she survives." Every heart that beats for hope is a testament to the power of compassion in a world that often feels cold. By liking this video and joining our community, you are helping us reach more people and rescue more souls just like her. Don't look away like the people on that sidewalk did. Stay with us until the very end to witness the miracle she so desperately deserves. Now came the hardest part of the mission, moving a 60-pound, severely injured dog into the back of a truck without causing her further trauma. Thomas knew that even the gentlest touch on her shattered leg would be like a knife twisting in a wound. He looked at Hope, who was now shivering violently from the cold rain and the onset of shock. Her eyes were glazed, and she seemed to be drifting away from him. He had to be quick, but he had to be as gentle as a mother's touch, knowing her life hung by a fraying thread. As Thomas reached down to lift her, Hope's eyes flew open, and a flash of old, buried trauma returned. She didn't know where she was being taken, and the memory of the hands that had hurt her in the past came rushing back. She snapped her jaws near Thomas's arm, a desperate no from a creature that had been betrayed by every human she had ever loved. Thomas didn't flinch or pull away in anger. He stayed right there in her space, letting her see that he wasn't afraid of her pain or her fear, and he certainly wasn't going to give up. "I'm not going to hurt you, Hope, I promise," he whispered, his face just inches from hers. He slowly put his hand on her forehead, letting the warmth of his skin soak into her chilled fur. It was the turning point, the moment where she finally surrendered her will to his. She let out a small, tired whimper and rested, her heavy head in the crook of his arm, closing her eyes as if to say, "I'm tired of fighting, please take care of me." Thomas felt a surge of protective love so strong it brought tears to his eyes, blinding him for a moment. With the help of the police officer, Thomas carefully lifted Hope and placed her on a bed of old blankets in the back of his truck. He tucked the two puppies in beside her so she could feel their warmth and know they were safe. The mother dog immediately began to lick them. With her remaining strength, her maternal bond proving stronger than her own agony. Thomas slammed the tailgate shut and climbed into the driver's seat, his hands shaking as he turned the key. He didn't care about the traffic or the red lights. He had a precious cargo that couldn't wait. As he sped through the rainy streets of Philadelphia, the sirens of the police cruiser leading the way, Thomas kept checking the rearview mirror. Hope was lying dangerously still, her breathing becoming more labored with every passing block. He knew that the internal damage could be far worse than what he could see on the surface. She was a fighter, but even the strongest warriors have their breaking point. "Stay with me, Hope. Just a few more minutes," he shouted over the sound of the rain, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm of prayer. The real battle for her life was just beginning. Thomas skidded his truck into the parking lot of the Mercy Pet Hospital, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. He didn't even wait to turn the engine off before he was out of the door, cradling Hope's heavy, broken body in his arms, while the two puppies were tucked safely into his thick jacket. He kicked the emergency room doors open with a thunderous bang, his voice booming through the quiet lobby. "I need help! She's dying and she's got babies!" The sterile, clinical smell of bleach and medicine hit his nose, a sharp contrast to the damp, gritty scent of the Philadelphia streets they had just escaped. The triage nurse gasped as she saw the state of the golden retriever, whose golden fur was now a matted tapestry of blood and city grime. Within seconds, a team of veterinary technicians swarmed around Thomas, lifting Hope onto a stainless steel gurney that looked cold and intimidating. Hope's eyes rolled back in her head, her body going limp as the adrenaline of the rescue finally wore off, leaving her at the mercy of medicine. Thomas stood there, his hands empty and shaking, feeling a sudden, crushing sense of helplessness. He watched them wheel her away toward the glowing red surgery sign, her tail hanging motionless off the edge of the metal table. Inside the examination room, Dr. Miller, a veteran surgeon with tired eyes, began a frantic assessment of the damage. He didn't just find a broken leg. The X-rays revealed a shattered pelvis and a femur that had been splintered into fragments by the force of the vehicle. But the physical trauma was only the beginning of her nightmare. The blood tests showed she was suffering from severe anemia and a heartworm infection that was clogging her precious heart. "She's been living on sheer willpower," the doctor muttered to his team, his voice filled with a mix of professional concern and raw, human admiration for the dog's incredible spirit. Hope lay on the table, surrounded by beeping monitors and the hiss of oxygen, feeling more alone than she had ever felt on the street. The bright LED lights above her were blinding, and the strange, gloved hands touching her wounds made her want to growl, but she had no strength left. In her hazy mind, she kept searching for the man with the dusty work boots and the kind voice. He was her only anchor in this sea of white light and pain. She didn't understand what the machines were, only that the silence of the clinic felt like the silence of the end she had expected. Thomas sat in the waiting room, his head in his hands, staring at the grime under his fingernails that had come from Hope's coat. The abstract villain, the person who had hit her and left her to rot, haunted his thoughts. He imagined the monster who could look into those brown eyes and choose to drive away, leaving a mother to suffer in the rain with her babies. Every tick of the wall clock felt like a judgment on humanity's cruelty. He reached into his pocket and squeezed his small Bible, whispering a plea for a miracle that science alone couldn't seem to provide in that moment. The head nurse approached Thomas with a clipboard, her expression grave as she broke down the astronomical cost of the emergency surgeries and the intensive care. Thomas didn't even look at the numbers. He just pulled out his credit card, the one he had been saving for his own home repairs. "Do whatever it takes," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. "She didn't give up on her babies, and I'm not giving up on her. If God brought us together on that sidewalk, he didn't do it just to let her die on a table." Suddenly, the calm of the clinic was shattered by a frantic code blue announcement over the intercom. Thomas saw doctors sprinting toward the surgery wing, their faces pale and determined. His heart stopped as he realized they were running toward Hope. Inside the theater, the monitor had flatlined, the steady beep, beep, replaced by a terrifying continuous drone that signaled the departure of a soul. Hope's heart, burdened by the heartworms and the trauma of the street, had finally given out under the weight of the anesthesia. The light was fading, and the darkness she had fought for weeks was finally closing in. Dr. Miller didn't hesitate. He began manual chest compressions, his hands pumping rhythmically against Hope's ribcage. "Stay with us, girl. Your babies need you," he commanded, sweat pouring down his face despite the air-conditioned room. They administered epinephrine, the needle sinking into her vein as the team held their breath. For 2 agonizing minutes, there was nothing but the sound of the ventilator and the desperate thud of the doctor's hands. It seemed like the city had finally won, that the indifference of the world had claimed one last victim. But Thomas's prayers were echoing in the halls, a silent force fighting against the void. Then, a miracle happened that left the entire medical team gasping in disbelief. A tiny erratic blip appeared on the screen, followed by another, and then a steady, rhythmic pulse. Hope's heart had started beating again, fueled by a maternal instinct that refused to leave her puppies orphaned. It was as if she had heard the doctor's mention of her babies and fought her way back from the very edge of eternity. The room erupted in a collective sigh of relief, but the danger was far from over. She was stable, but her body was so weak that the next 12 hours would decide her fate. While Hope fought for her life in the ICU, her 2 puppies were being cared for in a warm incubator, just a few doors away. They were tiny, fragile shadows of dogs, their ribs showing through their sparse fur. But they were drinking specialized formula with a hunger that proved they were their mother's children. Thomas was allowed to see them, and as he watched them sleep, he saw the same golden hue in their coats that Hope possessed. They were the living legacy of her sacrifice, and he promised them right then that they would never know the cold of a Philadelphia sidewalk ever again. The middle of the night was the hardest part of the vigil. The hospital was quiet, and the only sound was the hum of the machines keeping Hope alive. Thomas stayed in the lobby, refusing to leave his post, his presence a silent guard for the dog who had no one else. He thought about the millions of animals suffering in silence and how easily Hope could have been one of them. But she wasn't. She was a fighter, a survivor who had stared death in the face and blinked. But would she have the strength to wake up when the sun rose? At 3 a.m., a nurse came out to find Thomas asleep in the plastic chair. She gently tapped his shoulder and whispered, "You can come see her now. She's awake." Thomas stumbled to his feet, his heart racing, as he followed her into the recovery ward. There, in a large padded cage, lay Hope. She was hooked up to IV drips, and her leg was encased in a heavy cast, but her eyes were open. When she saw Thomas, her ears perked up just a fraction of an inch. It was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen in his 52 years. He knelt by the cage, the cold floor biting into his knees, and whispered her name. Hope's tail, though weakened, gave a single, slow wag against the blankets. It was a sign of recognition, a thank you, and a promise all rolled into one. She leaned her head against the bars, seeking the touch of the man who had pulled her from the abyss. In that moment, the medical bills, the exhaustion, and the cruelty of the world didn't matter. There was only the connection between 2 souls who had found each other in the dark. The doctor warned Thomas that the road to recovery would be long and fraught with complications. The heartworm treatment alone was dangerous, and her pelvis would take months to knit back together. But as Thomas looked at the determination in Hope's gaze, he knew the doctor was underestimating her. This wasn't just a dog, she was a miracle with a wagging tail. She had survived a hit and run, starvation, and a cardiac arrest. The monster who had abandoned her had lost, and love had won the first major battle of the war for her soul. As the first light of dawn began to bleed through the hospital windows, painting the walls in shades of gold and pink, Hope finally drifted into a peaceful, natural sleep. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sleeping with one eye open, watching for danger. She was safe, she was loved, and her babies were only a few yards away. The miracle that everyone had prayed for had arrived with the morning sun. Thomas stood up, stretched his aching back, and smiled for the first time in 24 hours. The worst was over, and a new life was beginning. The nurses began to call her the warrior queen of the clinic. Every time they checked her vitals, they were amazed by how quickly her spirit was mending her body. She began to eat on her own, taking small bites of high-protein food with a gentle grace that touched everyone who saw her. She seemed to know that she was being given a second chance, and she wasn't going to waste a single second of it. The transformation from a pile of rags on the sidewalk to the star of the hospital was nothing short of cinematic. But the most emotional moment came when the staff decided to bring her puppies to her for a brief visit. They placed the 2 golden balls of fur next to her head, and Hope immediately began to nuzzle them, her motherly instincts flaring up with a beautiful intensity. She cleaned them with her tongue, her eyes filling with a soft, protective glow that brought the nursing staff to tears. It was the ultimate therapy, a reminder of why she had fought so hard to stay on this earth. The bond between them was an unbreakable golden thread. Thomas watched this reunion through the glass of the recovery room, his heart swelling with a pride he couldn't explain. He realized that saving an animal doesn't just change the animal's life, it changes the person who does the saving. He felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years, a clarity that came from doing the right thing when it was hard. He wasn't just a construction worker anymore, he was the guardian of a family that the world had tried to throw away. The miracle wasn't just her survival, it was the love that had blossomed in the ruins. By the end of the first week, Hope was able to stand on 3 legs with the help of a sling. The first time she walked out into the hospital's small patch of grass, the entire staff gathered to cheer her. And she felt the sun on her back, the real sun, not the clinical lights of the ICU, and she let out a long, happy breath. The grass felt soft under her paws, a far cry from the burning asphalt of downtown. She looked up at the blue sky and then back at Thomas, her angel, in a reflective vest. The act of mercy was nearly complete, but the final chapter of her transformation was still to come. She had survived the crisis, but she still carried the scars of her past on her skin and in her heart. Now, she needed more than just medicine. She needed a home where she could finally forget the monster and the indifference of the city. Thomas knew exactly where that home should be, but he had to make sure he was ready for the responsibility. The miracle was halfway done, and the best was yet to be. 2 months had passed since that fateful rainy evening in Philadelphia, and the dog now known as Hope was barely recognizable as the broken soul from the sidewalk. The transition to Thomas's quiet suburban home was the final piece of the puzzle in her miraculous recovery. As she stepped out onto the lush green carpet of her new backyard, the contrast was staggering. There were no more screeching tires, no more choking exhaust fumes, and no more cold brick walls. Instead, there was the sweet scent of blooming jasmine and the rhythmic sound of a sprinkler. Hope breathed in the fresh air, her tail swaying with a rhythmic, joyful confidence that spoke of a heart finally at peace. The first order of business in her new life was the legendary glow-up that every rescued angel deserves. Thomas prepared a warm bath filled with soothing lavender suds, gently lifting Hope into the tub. As the warm water cascaded over her, it didn't just wash away the layers of city grime and motor oil. It seemed to wash away the memory of every person who had ever looked at her with disgust. Thomas scrubbed her fur with the tenderness of a father, watching as the dull, grey, matted mess transformed back into a brilliant, shimmering sea of liquid gold. When she finally stepped out and shook herself dry, she looked like a different creature entirely, a radiant, fluffy queen. Following her spa day, Hope was treated to her first real meal in a place she could finally call home. Thomas didn't just give her standard kibble, he prepared a feast of boiled chicken and sweet potatoes, placing the ceramic bowl on a soft rug in the kitchen. Hope approached the food with a gentle hesitation, looking up at Thomas as if to ask, "Is this really all for me?" When he gave her a wink and a "go on, good girl," she began to eat with a dignified gusto. For the first time in years, her stomach wasn't cramping from hunger, and she didn't have to keep one eye open for thieves or monsters. The physical miracle of her recovery was nothing short of a medical wonder. After weeks of physical therapy and Thomas's unwavering patience, the heavy cast was finally removed from her leg. Although she had a slight, charming limp that told the story of her survival, she was now able to trot and even run across the grass. To see her chasing a tennis ball, her golden ears flapping in the wind, was to witness the triumph of life over death. The warrior queen had reclaimed her kingdom, and every step she took was a defiant middle finger to the person who had left her for dead on that burning asphalt. Her 2 puppies, now named Justice and Mercy, had grown into chunky, energetic balls of golden fluff. They were the heartbeat of the house, constantly wrestling on the living room rug or following Thomas around like little shadows. They would never know the fear of a metal grate or the bite of a freezing rainstorm. They only knew the warmth of a soft bed and the security of a full belly. Hope would often sit on the porch, watching them play with a look of profound maternal pride. She had succeeded in the most important mission of her life. She had saved her children, and, in doing so, she had saved herself. Hope's personality began to bloom like a flower in the springtime. The terrified, cowering dog, who had once bared her teeth in a panic, was now the neighborhood's biggest sweetheart. She became Thomas's constant companion, resting her chin on his knee while he read his Bible in the evenings. She learned that human hands were meant for belly rubs and ear scratches, not for hitting or pushing away. She developed a playful habit of bringing Thomas his slippers. Every morning, her eyes dancing with a mischievous light that proved the trauma was finally buried deep beneath layers of new, happy memories. Thomas officially signed the adoption papers, making Hope a permanent member of his family. He often thought about the karma that awaited those who act with such cold-hearted cruelty. While the person who hit Hope likely continued their life in a grey, loveless void, Thomas had gained a treasure beyond measure. He realized that by stopping that day, he hadn't just saved a dog. He had invited a profound sense of grace into his own home. Hope was a living reminder that no matter how dark the world gets, there is always a light waiting for someone brave enough to carry it. The bond between the construction worker and the golden retriever was a testament to the fact that the best things in life aren't things at all. They are souls. One evening, as the sun began to set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange, Thomas and Hope sat together on the back porch. The puppies were fast asleep in a heap at their feet, exhausted from a day of play. Thomas looked down at Hope and saw her watching the sunset with an expression of pure, unadulterated serenity. She wasn't looking back at the sidewalk or the pain. She was looking forward to tomorrow. He realized then that she truly was an angel of 4 paws, sent to teach him about resilience and the power of a second chance. They had both been rescued in their own way. The story of Hope and Thomas spread through the community, inspiring others to look a little closer at the trash on the side of the road. People began to realize that every stray has a story, and every broken heart is capable of mending if given enough love. Hope's journey from a dying mother in a Philadelphia gutter to a pampered queen in a loving home became a beacon of light for thousands. It proved that one person's decision to stop and care can ripple out and change the world, one life at a time. The miracle was complete, and the golden retriever who was once ignored by everyone was now loved by the world. Who do you think deserves more attention? The hero who stops to help, or the monster who walks away? Does the person who abandoned this angel deserve forgiveness or punishment? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Leave a like if you believe that every animal deserves a loving home and a second chance at happiness. Your support helps us find more angels like Hope and bring them into the light. Comment Amen to bless Hope's new life and to honor the kind heart of Thomas. Don't forget to subscribe to join our mission of rescue and redemption. Together, we can make sure no animal ever has to suffer alone again.